Hello and welcome back, and today I want to talk about two 10 GBE NAS systems from Synology and QNAP, one of which a little older than the other, but both of them bringing a whole lot to the party. But what I really like about when I do these comparisons, I've got to say, is sometimes I'll compare two NASes from any one of the many brands in network attached storage or direct attached storage, and their architecture is pretty much the same. The whole reason these devices get compared is twofold. One, because I look at the specifications and go, they're quite similar at the same price. Which one is people going to choose? And sometimes it's you guys in the comments going, can you do us a favour? Can you ask us? So you'd let us know what these two, which one of these two I should buy, and then I make a comparison based on that. But often, when I do these comparisons, the answer is pretty obvious. You know, you look at it and you go, well, they're both the same price, but this one gives you so much more. Obviously, I'm going to buy that. But then, just occasionally, I'll do a comparison where it's two devices which are just insanely different. It's the same sort of money, but you're just getting such wildly different things. And this is one of those scenarios. This is the Synology DS1621xs Plus, and we're comparing it against the brand new QNAP TVS-672X. Now, I've used the word brand new there, but I really should have gone brand new with some italics, because these two devices, both of them, although they are very recent releases from both brands, they both use a lot of hardware we have seen both brands release in the last few years. In fact, the hardware inside the 1621XS, for the most part, has featured in releases from the brand over the last 3 or even close to 4 years in some cases. In the case of the QNAP release here has hardware inside it near enough identical to a release almost 3 years ago. Slightly more than that in some cases, depending on where you are in the world. So both of these devices released in the closing stages of 2020 and the early stages of 2021 seemingly have hardware inside that seems arguably that it might be a bit old. But you have to remember about server architecture. You have to remember that it's not about PC building and gamer rigs. There's hardware inside these devices has to be efficient and long term and be able to run 24/7 with as little degradation as possible. Now, I touched on why I like comparisons like this one, and that's because the architecture inside these two devices is similar but yet completely bloody different. The Synology, in this case, the 1621XS, arrives with a Xeon-based processor, the Xeon D1527. Now, this is a 2.2 GHz quad-core CPU that can be burst up to 2.7. It's got 32 PCIe lanes inside, which takes up a lot of the architecture that we're going to talk about in a bit. It also arrives with 8 gig of DDR4 ECC memory that can be upgraded up to 32 gig. So again, lots of business functionality there, lots of hardware inside to be impressed with. There's even M2 NVMe slots inside. Now, in the case of the QNAP, this has gone a very different way. This QNAP arrives with an Intel i3, the i3-8100T CPU, a 3.1 GHz quad-core processor. It's got embedded graphics because it's an Intel core. Pretty much all of them do. On top of that, it's UHD Graphics 630. It arrives with 8 gig of DDR4 memory as well, but this can go up to 64 gig, and it's non-ECC memory as well. And that CPU presents 16 PCIe lane, CPU PCIe lanes to play with as well. So, and it also has NVMe slots as well inside. So very different architecture. We have an ECC Xeon equipped NAS here and an Intel i3 8th Gen core processor there with non-ECC memory that can go up to 64 gig. And I've made videos in the past about Xeon versus Intel Core in servers. Xeon has always been the most desirable processor for data center utilization, and the Intel Core series, content creators, video production, and video editing and multimedia and stuff like that, Intel Core, even gamers and stuff like that, has always had a place in people's heart. So they're very distinct CPUs. Why is Xeon such in high regard in data center utilization? Largely because of the architecture of the processor, and the file handling is prioritous in the extreme. And with the Intel Core, its handling of graphical or visual equipped larger file types, 4K and stuff like that, is, you know, incomparable with the Xeon. There aren't a lot of GPU equipped Xeons out there. There's one in the 88X series that we've talked about before in the W range, but for the most part, these two CPUs after everything else that's going to be in this comparison are what will help you decide which device you should go for. Normally in my comparisons, I would front load these videos talking about what they both do, and I would talk about what they've got in common. They both arrive at 1400 NICA without VAT included. It's worth highlighting. But you've already heard me say that a bunch of times in other videos. They've both got their own software and surveillance and VMs and stuff like that. So I'm not going to include that in this video. Check that in the other ones to find out more. But between these two, I think if you are looking at file transmission, if you are looking at virtualization externally with Hyper-V or VMware, if you are looking at SCSI targets and LUNs and stuff like that, or you are looking at the NAS to be a set up and forget device, the Synology brings a lot with that Xeon. Even if that Xeon is 2016, 17 gen, it's still got plenty to work with, and Synology have spent a lot of time with R&D really getting the most out of that processor, where between the two of them, if I was going to use something as a 10 GBE target, I would move towards this side of the table. But if I'm using the NAS for live editing, if I'm using it for multimedia, if I'm using it for internal VM hosting, using for the likes of Virtualization Station or Synology's Virtual Machine Manager, I'm going to move towards this side of the table a lot more. That increased amount of memory off the bat, going up to 64 gig, that's attractive to me. And the fact that CPU has a dedicated graphical GPU component means that more demanding visual processes and large files of that caliber that have 3D component to them are going to be handled a great deal better by the Intel Core i3 quad core on this than they will be handled by that Xeon overall, utilizing a lot more resources to get the job done. I mentioned NVMe there as well. It's worth highlighting that they both have those NVMe slots inside, but the Synology only lets you utilize them for caching. Now, that caching is still exceptionally good. We've done loads of testing on it in the past, and the cache benefits of the high-performance NVMe M2s inside towards the 6 bays of traditional SATA storage and its expansions will be felt in terms of fluidity, in terms of lowering the latency, and just generally having much faster access to the small recurrent files within that Synology platform. The QNAP, on the other hand, allows you to use the M2 NVMe slots both for caching and for raw storage pools. And those storage pools can be a direct edit files on that fantastic fast-acting NAND, or within Q-tier, that tiered storage system where data, rather than copied back and forth to the cache in one form or another and living on the cache as well, or cloned, on Q-tier, data is moved in terms of its frequency of access between different performance layers, creating a hot, warm, cold architecture of storage. It utilizes some storage, some system resources to stay on top of that, but it's still nice to have that. And remember, both of these systems with that SSD caching, you will feel the difference. But it's the idea you can use it for raw storage, with a caveat. Bear in mind, the NVMe's inside that QNAP there, the 672X, those are PCIe Gen 3x2, so each slot will max at 2000 megs throughput from the SSD to the slot. So in a RAID configuration, you can RAID them together to try and combine that storage, but bear in mind that if you install a PCIe Gen 3x4 SSD in one of those slots with a promised 3 to 4000 meg performance from the likes of Seagate's Ironwolf 520s and Fire Cudas and WD Black SN 750s, you're not going to get that full performance there. So bear that in mind. You can use them as a storage pool, but you are using a slightly stripped down version. A lot of that comes down to those 16 PCIe lanes from the processor being spread across the system, along with the chipset lanes as well being used by other stuff on the board, and we will talk about traditional PCIe lanes just in a moment. But in terms of performance and handling, those CPUs have also got another thing to deal with that makes these two devices very distinct, and that is BTRFS or ext4 versus ZFS or ext4. Both of these systems arrive with a choice of file system off the bat, each of which with their own intrinsic benefits. BTRFS with faster shared folder duplication, lower resource consumption with background snapshots being created, and file self-healing are very, very desirable. But a lot of industry professionals will towards ZFS. Although the hungrier file system, certainly in terms of resource consumption, its removal of the volume layer in terms of directly putting data on the storage pool with RAID synchronization, RAID building and RAID resilvering and RAID scrubbing, all of which being done a great deal quicker, is very, very desirable, along with inline data deduplication and inline data compression. Just make sure that you up that memory. 8 gig isn't going to give you the full range of advantages from ZFS there. So for those of you that, you know, on a like-for-like ext4 basis, pretty level pegging. But BTRFS, I still feel Synology have really got behind BTRFS more than anyone else. And as good as it can be, it still is, for some, a toss of a coin different, because they would rather go ext4 than BTRFS, with ZFS being the king overall. So you should really look into how you want to access your data in your surrounding network environment, because that file system choice isn't something you're going to feel early doors, but you will feel it as you utilize the system in the long term. BTRFS is desirable, but arguably across storage industry, ZFS is that little bit more desirable. Now, well, the last thing to talk about with internal systems on this is PCIe upgrades. These two have gone very different directions, with the Synology arriving with a PCIe Gen 3x8 slot, potential 8,000 megabytes per second throughput via a connected card to the system. So again, if you are installing further 10 GBE ports to enable link aggregation, or utilizing the new Synology Fiber channel cards at 25 GBE, or some Mellanox or Intel 40 GBE cards, once you attach the expansion devices, you can saturate a lot of that potential 8,000 megs via the connected ports on these cards to a fair degree, but I think you're going to struggle to install a card that is going to fill the full PCIe Gen 3x8 performance and just general throughput and all the advantages in terms of power and stuff with a card on this Synology. Unless they're going to be scaling up their cards in the next few years beyond that traditional storage, I think the 16 full potential bays, the Core 6 and 10 expanded drives, is still not going to fully utilize that bay. And given that this system already has NVMe, M2 NVMe slots inside, you can't even really advocate the combo card with 10G and 2 PCIe slots in this system to fully saturate that 8,000 megs. Now, in the case of the QNAP, the 672X, it has 2 PCIe slots that are shared between the PCIe lanes of the CPU and the main chipset board controller. That is a PCIe Gen 3x4 slot, which again, 4,000 megs there for supported network cards and QM2 storage cards. But there's also a PCIe Gen 3x16 slot there. That slot to be used by graphics cards, by using external performance enhancement cards. There's a lot to be done with that slot. This is why this system, originally arriving with Thunderbolt, was able to utilize some of those slots accordingly for greater performance overall. Now, there's a larger degree of flexibility in terms of PCIe upgrades on the QNAP, with support of Wi-Fi 6 cards, for support of graphics cards, for support of storage upgrade cards, combo cards, increased network interface cards. There's even cards arriving on the scene at 100 gig, 100 GBE. And now, don't get me wrong, you're going to struggle to utilize a card like that in that PCIe 3x4, but I would be interested to see what happens when you bung one of those 100G cards in that PCIe Gen 3x16 slot. Is it going to be limited as a GPU only 3x16? Interesting to see, but I still think you'll get a lot of results out of that card. And although this 6-bay system won't saturate a full 25 or 40G connection on its own, I would argue that with expansion devices on this system, with a larger array of expansion options via USB and PCIe proprietary external SAS cards from QNAP in their TR and TL series, you have more opportunity to fully fill these PCIe slots in terms of throughput and the upgrades you put in them. I'm not saying you have to utilize the full extent of them, but I'm saying if you've got it, it's nice to know you have that option later on. It is going to come down to you and your architecture though. So in terms of internal architecture, I'm vibing more with the QNAP, but it has to be said that QNAP does come with a few caveats inside to make the most of that architecture. The Synology, on the other hand, doesn't pull any punches. It goes, you've got this, this, you can do all of these things, and we'll allow you to do it to the fullest of its ability. There's just fewer of them overall. And again, it's that whole speed versus acceleration, height versus width argument. Now, in terms of external connectivity, and we look at the rear of these devices, it's worth highlighting that the Synology, I would argue, has played it a little safe. They've got that 10 GBE copper connection, the 10G base T. They've got a couple of 1 GBE LAN ports there, which are going to be great for low level and failover, but they're going to be largely usurped by the 10. There's some USB 3.2 Gen 1 5G ports there, largely occupied for external storage, but there is some options there for supported peripherals. And then on top of that, finally, you've got those eSATA connections there for the attachment of the DX517 expansion devices to add those 10 bays of JBOD storage that the system can absorb into its RAID. But bear in mind, this system does not support Synology's hybrid RAID or SHR system of fluid RAID system there, which may be a bit of a bummer to some of you. The QNAP, on the other hand, provides a huge array of connectivity, which again, because this is based on that system a few years ago, a number of you may already be familiar with. Now, it arrived with 4 USB 3.2 Gen 2 10G ports there, again, supporting external storage, expansion devices, supported peripherals such as the 5GB to USB adapter, and a bunch of other KVM and accessory devices in conjunction with the HDMI 4K 60 frames per second HDMI 2.0 port on the rear. So again, that parallel HD station application ready and available to you to take advantage of, even without a graphics card inside. On top of that, you have got 2 USB 1 GBE ports, again, who cares. On top of that, you've got a 10G base T port there, so copper 10 GBE. And on top of that, you have got those PCIe upgrade slots as well as mentioned. They've both got that PCIe upgradability. But what I want you to take from what I just said there was, remember at the top of the video, I said both of these devices are new releases that both use architecture that both brands have been putting out for like 3+ years. So both of these devices are both new and sort of been there, done that. But the difference is looking at them. It seems like I'm being spectacularly harsh here in terms of hardware, at least, that the Synology has seemingly played it safe. It's arrived with hardware that's a few years old, but it seems a little old as well. The QNAP has used architecture that it's already featured a few years ago, but it's still kind of stood the test of time with that HDMI 4K, with the USB 3.2 Gen 2, with the PCIe 3x4, and the NVMe slots inside that are available for storage and more. There just seems to be a bit more future-proofing in there, which may not be as future-proof as it was a few years ago, but it's still got a few more legs left in it. Now, in spite of this, we can talk about another thing that just annoys me about these solutions. The Synology, I'm impressed, arrived with 5 years of manufacturer's warranty straight off the bat. Buying hardware these days in a desktop form with 5 years warranty is damn hard. You try buying any appliance, I think even an iPhone has like 1 or 2 years warranty included off the bat. That's comical. 5 years is an enormous amount of support from a brand. The QNAP arrives with 2 years. That seems comical to me. 2 years when some of their other releases have 3 years and some of their enterprise stuff has got 5 years. 2 years on a solution that's $1,400 nicker without the tax? That seems a little short to me. And for a device that I've said a few times in this video has tremendous future-proofing, that seems tremendously short-sighted to me. In terms of software, it's worth highlighting that obviously both of them take advantage, as mentioned, of BTRFS and ZFS, as well as ext4. They've both got that wide range of applications. But once again, the Synology isn't a 50-50 budget split. You're not spending that money and 50% of it goes on the software, 50% on the hardware. You do feel that the software has gone 60%, the money has gone 60% software and 40% hardware. DSM, the more user-friendly, the more intuitive, and the more graphically impressive of the two GUIs and operating systems, and its applications seemingly more stable, if that's the right word. QNAP, on the other hand, is a more 50-50 split in terms of hardware and software. They have more applications, it has to be said, more licenses for surveillance, more licenses for everything, in fact, and more expandability as well, and things you can do with those expansions within the storage manager. Even their cloud storage allows you to attach via cloud gateways and hybrid mount to more cloud platforms than Synology and Hybrid Share, prioritizing their own cloud platform. But it has to be said, QNAP, although they bring a lot of the software to the market and to the end user before Synology, they have a tendency to bring the software out and then kind of flesh it out and polish it while it's available, which results in an arguably mixed result. Synology, on the other hand, will generally take longer to bring a software application to the end user's attention, but it's a more complete, a more polished version in the end. And I think a lot of the time when I compare these brands, Nintendo versus Sega, or console gaming versus PC gaming, I think a lot of the time the way you feel about those different respective platforms, and iOS versus Android even, it will dictate your feelings towards these devices once they're in your home or in your office. Ultimately, what it comes down to is that 60-40 versus 50-50 split on both of these devices. They have a very similar price point, but what they bring to you is more than just 10 GBE. And as a complete solution, I think it's more about what you want than what these are going to give you. Remember, customization, flexibility, a little bit more time to set things up and keep it moving, ease of use, lower educational need at the beginning, of a much entry point in terms of software access, but a lower glass ceiling overall in terms of what you can do ultimately. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Click like if you have and subscribe to learn more. There's a full breakdown and comparison over at NAS Compares, linked in the description. And if you've enjoyed this video, why not head there and read up a little bit more. It's a little bit more intensive, more so than me staring at you right now on a camera anyway. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.